Hello everybody, Barsoap64 here, and I'm back. It's been a few years since my last upload, I believe two or so, maybe more. And I've decided I wanted to take another crack at criticizing the Indoctrination Theory. My first video did remarkably well, compared to all my other videos on the channel, and I've recently started to get back into Mass Effect 3 and started to explore the gameplay and lore a little bit more. So I would like this video to be more of my official debunking of the Indoctrination Theory, as opposed to my last video, which was more of an opinion-based, like just a topical video, just me chatting about my ideas for the Indoctrination Theory and why I didn't really like it, and I was just kind of going off the top of my head for reasons why I didn't like it. And I got quite a bit of backlash from that video in the comments section. I didn't really expect it. Like, I expected there to be like people coming into the comments to criticize my ideas and get a discussion going, but I did not expect that many people to absolutely just rip on my video for the ideas that I was putting forward. So this one is going to be a little bit more detailed and a little bit more flushed out with legitimate arguments, and like my ideas have been built up more for this video to hopefully give you guys a better understanding of what I was thinking in my original video. So over the past few months, I've been reading through my old comments. I've been going on the internet and reading old Reddit forums from 7 to 8 years ago. Just crazy ridiculous how much time has passed since this game was really at the forefront of the gaming community. So I've been reading through all these old forums. I read through some wiki pages and compiled my arguments for this video based on different people's posts and comments from those different pages. And ladies and gentlemen, this time around I actually read through the entire Indoctrination Theory Wikipedia page, the fandom page that was written by I believe Redditors and other people from forums on the internet, just to get a better understanding and a better grasp of this theory overall, because last time I didn't actually do that. I just went off of the posts and videos that I'd seen on YouTube. So this time I wanted to get more concrete basing to argue against. So now I know what I'm dealing with. Let's get right into this, guys.
Don't shoot! Please,
Alright guys, I'm going to kick things off here with Rana Thanoptis. So, I actually spoke about Rana Thanoptis in my last video, but I want to just recap what I said there and further flesh out the details. So, the theory uses Rana Thanoptis kind of as patient zero when comparing Shepard to other people that were indoctrinated. Now, the reason this is the case is because Rana has supposedly been working with Reaper technology for around the same amount of time as Shepard has been in contact with Reaper tech, give or take a little bit of time. So the argument is, if Rana Thanoptis has become indoctrinated after this amount of time researching with Reaper tech, then Shepard must also have some form of indoctrination at least being attempted on him after this period of time. However, my argument in response to this is that Rana has continuously been exposed to the Reapers. It has been constant. The Reaper's influence has been unending during her period of time working on the research base. And if you allow her to live past that, she returns in Mass Effect 2, and in Mass Effect 3 you also receive an email stating that she was basically entirely indoctrinated and killed a bunch of people. And considering the timelines for Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, that's roughly 3.5 to 4 years straight that she would have been experiencing some sort of effect from indoctrination. And this is actually very different from Shepard's situation. Shepard experienced Mass Effect 1, and was not entirely exposed to Reapers through that point in time, and then he was killed at the very beginning of Mass Effect 2, and he was gone for 2 years straight. So Shepard's exposure to Reapers and Reaper technology has been broken up over time. There's little bits of exposure. It's not one continuous timeline. There's even a piece of dialogue in one of the games that states that Shepard was completely brain dead for those 2 years. So does indoctrination continue after you've been brain dead? And this brings up an entire other issue with the indoctrination theory, and that is, when does the indoctrination officially begin? Because there are multiple sources given by different people on the internet and on the wiki stating that it happens during the entirety of Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, that it happens in the middle of Mass Effect 2, it happens in the middle of Mass Effect 3, it happens at the very end of Mass Effect 3. So when does it begin? Nobody really knows, but that's something we can talk about a little bit later. Anyway, that's the end of this argument. I believe that there is no reason to compare Shepard to Rana Thanoptis because the circumstances are too different. Shepard had bits of exposure over time, he was killed and he returned. Rana Thanoptis had continuous exposure. That is a big difference. Alrighty, moving on to indoctrination itself. Indoctrination is a very powerful Reaper asset that essentially acts as a form of galactic mind control. Now, the Reapers derived and based this technology off of the Leviathan's ability to organically and naturally control other organics' behaviors through a very similar process. Now, seeing that the Reapers were actually created by the Leviathans, this makes a lot of sense. Now, almost every character we encounter in the Mass Effect universe that has some form of indoctrination bestowed upon them all exhibit it in a very similar, if not the same way. Now, the most common form that this manifests as is wanting to keep the Reapers alive and available to some extent. Whether that's declaring the Reapers are good and aren't actually going to destroy everything, or whether it's declaring to control the Reapers. At the end of the day, it's all the same thing. The Reapers live through it. And along with this, these individuals that are now beginning to support the Reapers become violent towards the people that oppose the Reapers. So, the theory states that Shepard is being indoctrinated. Not necessarily that he is indoctrinated, but that the Reapers are attempting to do so. Now, if that's the case, why is it taking so long? Again, we run into the issue, as stated before, that no one is really certain as to when the indoctrination is supposedly taking place. But aside from that, the point still stands that why would the indoctrination be going so slow? Now, the answer to this is simple, is that Shepard's will, Shepard's mind, is much stronger than anyone else in the Mass Effect universe. And there are actually two characters that comment on this in the game, Liara and Leviathan. And this allows us to speculate that perhaps it is impossible for Shepard to be fully indoctrinated. Now, the theory suggests that the reason the indoctrination is going so slowly is also in part to Shepard's ability to withstand the effects of indoctrination and mind control. However, one would also assume that the Reaper's most valuable asset, their strongest weapon, would probably work when it needs to. And the Indoctrination Theory Wikipedia page also states that fast indoctrination is entirely possible, as long as the circumstances allow for it. And seeing as Shepard is the Reaper's #1 target after the events of Mass Effect 1, there is no reason for the Reapers not to focus all of their strength onto breaking Shepard's will and indoctrinating him completely. So, with all that in mind, it makes a lot more sense to suggest that Shepard cannot be indoctrinated, and thus the indoctrination theory itself cannot be proven. More evidence backing up my argument is that there have been characters in the Mass Effect games that have also had very strong wills, but have also been almost entirely indoctrinated. However, they came nowhere close to the amount of resilience that Shepard exhibits. Matriarch Benezia, Saren, and the Illusive Man were all completely indoctrinated. Yet, they showed points of mental strength when they were able to break free of the Reaper's control and explain to Shepard that they did indeed know that they were indoctrinated. There are also Paragon options in the dialogue with both Saren and the Illusive Man, which ends with them committing suicide because they know they are indoctrinated and that there is nothing they can do about it. Shepard experiences no such mental break throughout any of the Mass Effect games. He sticks to his beliefs and continues his missions to destroy the Reapers, without once experiencing a lapse similar to Saren, Matriarch Benezia, or the Illusive Man. And one last piece of compelling evidence is that Shepard's crew members do not experience any form of indoctrination either. Even crew members that were abducted by the Collectors in Mass Effect 2 show no significant signs of indoctrination and stay true to themselves throughout the remainder of the games. One would assume that if any of the squad members became completely indoctrinated, that they would no longer want to continue their mission and would instead begin to support the Reaper cause. Now, since this isn't the case, and none of the squad members become influenced by the Reapers enough to cease their mission, it is safe to assume that Shepard himself is also not indoctrinated. Alright, so the beam rush. The first thing I'm going to cover is the Normandy evacuation scene. Now, the Indoctrination Theory states that the reason Harbinger did not fire on the Normandy as it was evacuating Shepard's crew was because firing at the Normandy would cause a massive explosion that would in turn kill Shepard, and the Reapers do not want Shepard dead, they want to indoctrinate him. However, my argument against this still stands from my last video. This evacuation scene did not exist before the extended cut DLC, meaning that this was a fan service added in to cater to those that put a lot of time into developing their war assets. If you have low effective military strength while completing this mission, your crew is killed on the battlefield. Now, since the extended cut was released, if you have high EMS while completing this mission, your crew is evacuated. It would make absolutely no sense for the developers to add in this extended cut aspect if Harbinger was just going to destroy it anyway. This is supposed to be your reward for having high EMS. Without the extended cut DLC, this scene does not exist, and that is why Harbinger does not destroy the Normandy. Another thing I would like to touch on is the low EMS squad death scene itself as well. Many people who support the indoctrination theory claim that Harbinger intentionally drags his beam slowly towards the crew members in an attempt to keep Shepard alive. However, this is completely false. There are multiple other times in the Mass Effect games where the Reapers fire upon a target and drag the beam towards them, rather than directly hitting them. And here is my evidence right here.
Where's our fire support? We need reinforcements on them!
So, there you have it. That part is officially debunked. Moving on, I'm going to talk about Harbinger's beam itself now. The theory states that Shepard would not be able to survive the full blast of Harbinger's beam. And that is correct. However, I do not believe that the beam actually hit Shepard. It is not entirely unreasonable to suggest that Harbinger missed his final shot on Shepard and instead blew away the ground next to him. Theory supporters argue that Harbinger does not miss any of his shots on any of the other soldiers that are attempting to reach the beam, and again, that is also false. Here's the proof. Theory supporters also argue that the beam that did hit the ground next to Shepard was actually some form of new indoctrination technology. So if the beam actually hit Shepard, that is how he managed to survive. It wasn't the regular destructive beam that we've seen multiple times in the past, actually every time in the past, but instead is some new form of technology that has never, ever, ever even been talked about at any other point in the game. So I'm not understanding how that is more credible than suggesting the beam missed. Honestly, I believe that the indoctrination theory needed a way to explain this beam hitting Shepard without killing him, and instead of accepting that the beam could have missed, they put forward the idea that the beam is some new indoctrination technology, and the beam was just solely for Shepard to become indoctrinated, which honestly is not as credible as suggesting that it just missed. Also, the theory states that after Shepard awakens from being hit by the beam, or after he gets up, his vision has changed, his hearing has changed, the ambience has changed, everything has changed. And they make that a point of interest by suggesting that he is now completely indoctrinated, and that is why those changes took place. However, if the beam blast was that powerful and it hit the ground next to him and injured him to that degree, then it makes sense that those changes would have taken place. Shepard is now severely wounded. He's hurt, he's bleeding, his vision has been damaged, and he has a bit of hearing loss. That all makes total sense if the beam had hit the ground next to him and was powerful enough to hurt him that bad. Now, some people involved in the theory speculate that Major Coates was actually indoctrinated as well. And to back this up, they suggest that the reason Coates called the retreat during the beam rush was because he was indoctrinated and wanted to give the Reapers a chance to attack. However, this doesn't make much sense. You see, from Coates' perspective, the entire Hammer ground team has been destroyed. There is nobody left to continue the push to the beam. So naturally, Coates would call a retreat. Yet, one thing I would like to point out is that Coates doesn't actually call a retreat, he calls a regroup, which makes a lot more sense than a retreat, because at the very beginning of the beam rush scene, Anderson tells the entire Hammer team that nobody is to retreat, this is all or nothing. So it makes sense to assume that Major Coates simply wanted to stay alive for as long as he could and regroup with his forces to potentially come up with a different plan to get someone to the beam. Now, right after Coates calls his regroup, Harbinger can be seen leaving his defensive position next to the beam. And some theorists speculate that the reason this happens is because Coates is indoctrinated and he is working with the Reapers, and Harbinger knows that there is now no more forces attempting to reach the beam. However, it makes more sense to assume that Harbinger is simply chasing Coates' team while it attempts to regroup. So, rather than Harbinger leaving because he's working with Coates, he's leaving because he believes the threat is eliminated. Alright, moving on to the Citadel. Let's get things started. After Shepard walks through the beam, he arrives in an unknown corridor full of bodies. The first thing I want to touch on is the smoke that is coming off of Shepard's body. Shepard.
Anderson. You up here too?
I believe that the smoke coming off of Shepard's body has to do with him traveling through the beam without a vehicle. Nobody has ever went through a relay without some sort of vehicle, and this is the first time that it has been done with simply a body. So it makes sense that there is some energy transfer between Shepard's body and the beam, which causes him to smoke after he has passed through it. Now, the next thing I want to touch on is Anderson's voice kind of snapping Shepard out of it after he is unconscious on the Citadel. Shepard. Now, I believe the theory states that this is Shepard's radio going off while he is unconscious, with Anderson trying to contact him. So while Shepard is still lying on Earth next to the beam, the noise is making it into his unconscious mind. But to me, I feel like it really is just Anderson waking him up. Shepard was unconscious on the Citadel floor, and when he heard Anderson, he got a little neural jolt, and it woke him up. So honestly, that's all I think it is. Alright, the next thing I have to address is Anderson actually being on the Citadel. People were saying how it's impossible that Anderson could have been on the Citadel at the same time as Shepard, in roughly the same place as Shepard, given the circumstances of how Shepard made it onto the Citadel himself. However, I have an argument for this, and it's the same argument from my last video. And that is, we are not sure how long Shepard was unconscious after Harbinger blasted the beam beside him, and we are not sure how long Shepard is unconscious on the Citadel after passing through the relay beam. It's possible that Anderson was injured on the battlefield, but managed to witness Shepard walking through the relay beam. And after seeing Shepard go through the beam, Anderson may have followed shortly after, which is what Anderson actually claims in the game. And if Shepard was unconscious on the Citadel for a significant amount of time, Anderson could have easily made it to the relay with enough time to catch up to Shepard. Now the next issue that gets brought up is, how does Anderson manage to get ahead of Shepard then? And again, I have an answer for this, as Anderson even states himself that the doorways and hallways move on their own. Meaning that if what Anderson said is true and he arrived on a different part of the Citadel, and was there long enough before Shepard was awoken, the doors and hallways could have moved to allow Anderson to have an advantage of time over Shepard.
I followed you up, but we didn't come out the same place. No. At least I don't think we did.
Anderson?
One of the walls here just realigned itself. The place is shifting, changing.
Don't get too far ahead of me.
Where do you think you're at?
Just found that chasm we were talking about.
Hold on. I see something. A control panel, maybe. I'm just gonna go on.
Anderson! Damn it.
Okay, and the last thing I have to talk about is the bodies that are actually on the Citadel. Many people were stating that it doesn't make any sense that there would be that many dead bodies on the Citadel, and that is proof that it is all happening in Shepard's head. But the conversation between Shepard and Anderson states that Anderson is wondering if the Reapers are preparing to build another Reaper with all the dead bodies. We know from Mass Effect 2 on the Collector base that in order to create a Reaper, a large amount of organic substance is required. And again, in Mass Effect 2, they used the organic material from the bodies as fuel for the Reaper. Also, Leviathan states that at the end of every cycle, a new Reaper is created.
Each harvest ends with the birth of a Reaper, perfect in its design, each formed in Harbinger's image, our image.
And to back this up, the catalyst itself also says that the genetic material from the races that are harvested are converted and stored into Reaper form.
We help them ascend, so they can make way for new life, storing the old life in Reaper form.
So the piles of human bodies on the Citadel are simply harvested remains that are being prepared to be converted into a Reaper. Okay, the Illusive Man. At this point in the theory, things start to get a little bit complicated. as it begins to suggest that both Anderson and the Illusive Mans are just figments of Shepard's imagination while he's being indoctrinated. However, my argument against this is fairly straightforward. How did the Illusive Man make it to the Citadel? Well, he's been there the entire time. And we know that because after we assault the Illusive Man's base, the Prothean VI explains to Shepard that the Illusive Man has already left the base and made it to the Citadel to alert the Reapers of the plan to utilize the catalyst against them. And this means that the Illusive Man has been on the Citadel since one mission prior to Shepard arriving on Earth. And that's how he manages to be there at the final confrontation. Okay, the next thing I have to touch on is the whispers that appear during the actual conversation with Anderson and the Illusive Man. Oh, as well as the oily shadow figures that appear on the screen. Now, my argument is that the whispers and the oily figures on the screen are just products of the Illusive Man, because neither of these anomalies occur before the Illusive Man enters the conversation. If the entire game past the point of Shepard entering the beam is supposed to be him being indoctrinated, then why do these oily shadow figures and whispers only appear when the Illusive Man is around? It makes absolutely no sense.
Anderson.
Shepard. I can't.
I underestimated you, Shepard.
What if...
I warned you. Control is the means to survival. Control of the Reapers, and of you, if necessary.
Alright, so after the initial introduction of the Illusive Man, the oily figures only appear when the Illusive Man is in close vicinity to Shepard,
so.
or when he is showcasing his newfound powers.
Controlling me is a lot different than controlling a Reaper.
Have a little faith. When humanity discovered the mass relays, when we learned there was more to the galaxy than we imagined, only if we can harness their ability to control.
Bullshit. We destroy them, or they destroy us.
And waste this opportunity? Never.
You're playing with things you don't understand. With power you shouldn't be able to use.
I don't believe that. Look at the power they wield. Look at what they can do.
So at this point, I hope I can convince you that the shadowy figures are a product of the Illusive Man's presence. Another thing to note is that the whispering has ceased. As a matter of fact, the only time the whispering is present is when the Illusive Man is introduced into the conversation at the very beginning of this scene. As for the remainder of the conversation, it's simply ambient electricity that we're hearing, not whispering.
Only if we can harness their ability to control.
Bullshit. We destroy them, or they destroy us.
And waste this opportunity? Never. We're stuck in his ways.
The next thing I need to talk about is the actual power that the Illusive Man uses to control both Anderson and Shepard. Because apparently claiming that it's biotics is not enough to satisfy the indoctrination theorists. So my argument is, perhaps it is a Reaper upgrade. This is the first time we've seen the Illusive Man with his neck burnt open like this. The character model has never had these new cybernetic enhancements all over the lower half of the Illusive Man's face. And if we remember back to Mass Effect 1, Saren received Reaper enhancements, and these came in the form of new technologies that were then implemented into his own biological tissue. So is it really that absurd to suggest that the Illusive Man has also received Reaper upgrades, considering he's been indoctrinated for this long? And if these enhancements gave him the ability to control other organics, that seems like a pretty good answer for how he was able to make Shepard shoot Anderson. And if I could touch on what I talked about before with Shepard having a strong mind, it still makes sense that the Illusive Man would be able to use some form of Reaper power against Shepard, but not the full form. Thus, the Illusive Man would be able to control Shepard's movement through his Reaper enhancements. However, he would not be able to control Shepard's mind. Also, the Illusive Man committing suicide is identical to Saren committing suicide in Mass Effect 1. And if Saren committed suicide while still having Reaper enhancements, it's entirely possible that the Illusive Man could have Reaper enhancement and also commit suicide. Shepard is able to break through the Reaper indoctrination of both Saren and the Illusive Man to get them to see how indoctrinated they really are, which in turn causes them to kill themselves for the greater good.
Shepard.
I should also note that the shadows appear in this section while the Illusive Man is being confronted by Shepard about his indoctrination. And the reason for that is that the Reaper enhancements are being forced to combat the Illusive Man's resistance, which in turn means they have to increase their power in hopes of maintaining control. Hence, the shadows appear to represent the Reaper enhancements increasing their strength, just as they have represented every other time we've seen them.
I tried, Shepard.
And if the theory is true, and this was all taking place in Shepard's head, then why does the Illusive Man kill himself? If Anderson is supposed to represent Shepard's true self, and the Illusive Man is supposed to represent Shepard's indoctrinated self, then how can one whole side of Shepard's psyche just kill itself after being convinced that it's wrong? It just doesn't really add up. Especially if we consider the final true choice to be within the catalyst itself. If the Illusive Man is supposed to be the embodiment of indoctrination within Shepard's psyche, and it kills itself, doesn't that mean that Shepard has beat indoctrination? So then how is the final catalyst scene also part of indoctrination? Shepard has to beat indoctrination twice for indoctrination theory to be true? Because according to the theory, the only real way Shepard can outlive indoctrination is choosing the destroy ending. Meaning that if you choose control Earth synthesis, you are lost to indoctrination. However, the Illusive Man is also supposed to represent indoctrination within Shepard's mind, but now the Illusive Man has killed himself, so Shepard only broke free of one part of indoctrination, and now he has to break through another? It just doesn't add up for me. On to my last major topic, the catalyst. And the first thing I'd like to discuss is Shepard's wound to his stomach. So, after Anderson and Shepard confront the Illusive Man, and they win, they have a moment to rest and reflect on their actions. And during this sequence, Shepard actually looks down at his body, revealing that he has a massive wound to his lower abdomen. And right away, without looking into it, without adding any context, the indoctrination theory automatically assumes that this is proof that all of this is going on within Shepard's mind. And the reason they suggest this is because Shepard was never seen being shot in that area, and that's what they assume this is a gunshot. And I believe that the theory takes this from the moment that Shepard fired on Anderson with the gun, saying that when Shepard shot Anderson, it actually wounded himself, representing that this entire scenario was due to indoctrination within Shepard's mind. But when you break this down, there are a few different things we can talk about regarding this scene. The first thing being that Shepard is holding that wound well before he shot Anderson. In fact, right after Shepard stands up on his initial arrival to the Citadel, he is already nursing this location where his wound is seen later on. Through this entire scene, Shepard can be seen walking with one hand on his abdomen in the exact same spot as we see later on.
There's human remains scattered.
Sounds familiar. I'm in a dark hallway.
Shepard can also be seen grabbing his shoulder where the Marauder shields fired on him before he entered the relay.
You think they're making a Reaper in here?
Sure.
However, right after this incident, he goes back to nursing his original wound on his abdomen. And it appears that the character model stops holding his wound only when we are given control of Shepard. Even during the conversation with the Catalyst, Shepard is back to holding his wound.
Where am I? Solution? To what?
The created will always rebel against their creators. You bring it on yourselves. But we found a way to stop that from happening. A way to restore order.
So I think it's safe to say that this is simply a formality between two different character models of Shepard. Character model that gets used in the cutscenes, and the character model that is controlled by the player in the gameplay. Shepard received this wound sometime before entering the relay beam. And who's to say it's a gunshot? Shepard could have been hit with a very heavy piece of debris when Harbinger fired on Shepard and hit the ground next to him. And I believe that Shepard noticing his wound while talking to Anderson is simply an aspect deployed by the narrative to allow us to understand how wounded Shepard really is, which makes Shepard's collapse make sense because now we know that he has a terrible wound and he has likely lost a lot of blood.
What do you need me to do?
Nothing's happening. The crucible's not firing. It's gotta be something on your end. Commander Shepard.
I don't see... I'm not sure how to...
Okay, now I'm going to talk about the catalyst itself. And right off the bat, I want to talk about a piece of dialogue that happens earlier in Mass Effect 3, in which Admiral Hackett explains that they know what the Crucible is going to do, but they don't know how it is going to do it, which is essentially foreshadowing for our three choices at the very end of the game. Because by using the Crucible, we are able to make three very different decisions and outcomes with one object. Now, the reason I bring this up is because the Indoctrination Theory believes that the three decisions that you get to make at the end of the game are all happening in Shepard's mind as he goes through indoctrination. However, since Admiral Hackett explains that he knows what the Crucible will do, just not how, we essentially are being told that there is going to be choices for us to make at the end of this game, which in turn can kind of put this aspect of the Indoctrination Theory to rest. Okay, moving on, I'm going to talk about this Reaper AI. And of course by that I mean the Catalyst itself, because it states to us that it is a Reaper AI. Now, if we consider our conversation that we had with Leviathan, that took place inside Shepard's mind, in which Leviathan took on familiar forms to help Shepard understand better, then it's easy to extrapolate that perhaps this Reaper AI is taking on the form of a child because Shepard is familiar with it. Now, continuing, I've seen a lot of people who support the Indoctrination Theory claiming that the Paragon and Renegade choices of the Decision Chamber don't make sense to what Shepard's values actually are, meaning that Destroy should be the Paragon option and Control should be the Renegade option. However, my response to this is fairly straightforward. The Catalyst and the Citadel were created by the Reapers, so it makes sense that as a final failsafe, the Reapers would purposefully make the Destroy ending seem like the bad ending. And this is the reason that the Reaper AI also tries to talk you out of picking the Destruction ending, because utilizing the Synthesis or the Control ending inevitably allows the Reaper's existence to continue. It has nothing to do with the regular Paragon and Renegade options that we get throughout the game. And let's not forget that the Destroy ending also wipes out all other forms of synthetic life in the universe. That means the Geth and EDI are gone. And generally speaking, the Geth and EDI, as well as other advanced AIs, tend to believe that they are sentient. So at the end of the day, choosing Destroy isn't just about ending the Reapers, but also destroying the lives of the synthetics. And from a moral standpoint, some could believe that this is indeed a Renegade option, especially when compared to controlling and synthesizing, which have positive outcomes for synthetic and organic lives. And since the Reaper AI states that the Reapers have miscalculated the resilience of the organics, their last line of defense is to convince Shepard not to destroy them. Shepard is the first organic in galactic history to step foot into the Catalyst domain, which means the entire fate of the Reapers and the galaxy depends solely on Shepard's decisions. So again, it only makes sense that the Reapers would attempt to preserve themselves by convincing Shepard not to destroy them. Alrighty, the very last thing I want to talk about in this section is the Vent Kid. Now, as all of you probably know, the Vent Kid is a little boy at the very beginning of Mass Effect 3 that Shepard witnesses die. And he's an aspect of the game that is very, very controversial, as many people suggest that it is symbolism or a form of PTSD, or if you believe in the Indoctrination Theory, you believe that it is a effect of the Reapers manipulating Shepard's mind and beginning the indoctrination process. Now, the big issue with this is trying to figure out when the Vent Kid actually died, because he is seen at the very beginning of the game playing with a little toy spaceship, and then is seen running into a building which then explodes. However, he is then met again in a vent, and he mysteriously disappears from said vent after Shepard looks away. And he's seen one final time getting into a space shuttle, an Alliance space shuttle, which is then blasted out of the sky by the Reapers. Yet that's not even the end, because he comes back 3 more times in the game in the form of a dream, in the form of nightmares that Shepard keeps having, these sort of recurring nightmares. And even then, one final time appearing as the Catalyst. So, it is difficult to deduce at what point the child is a hallucination, at what point the child is a figment of Shepard's imagination, or at what point the child actually dies. But one thing is for certain is that the Vent Kid was real at the very beginning of the game. Now, if this was an attempt at PTSD, the developers did it in a very odd way, because it would make more sense for Shepard to be mourning his lost crewmates and all of his biggest mistakes, rather than this one child that he met at the very beginning of the game. But if we interpret this as symbolism for all the people that Shepard can't save, then it begins to make a lot more sense. As Shepard attempted to save this boy from the vent and was met with the response of, "You can't save me," can be loosely extrapolated to all the people that Shepard can't save, and thus is the reason for his recurring nightmare featuring the boy, because the boy is simply symbolism for the innocent lives that will be lost. Now, I must admit that the Indoctrination Theory is actually a lot more compelling with regard to the Vent Boy. Especially since the Vent Boy returns as the Catalyst, it would only make sense that the original boy was a figment of Shepard's imagination that was generated by the Reapers. But, as I stated before, Leviathan had the ability to infiltrate Shepard's brain and use people that he saw as familiar to help get his point across. So, it would also be possible for the Reapers to do the same without indoctrinating him. That's how the Catalyst could take on the form of Vent Boy. Another interesting thing to note is that if the developers were at some point planning Indoctrination Theory to be the legitimate ending, it would make sense for the game to open with the Vent Boy. And I read an unofficial post stating that one of the developers did indeed say that indoctrination was on the developers' minds while they worked on the beginning of this game. However, they could not create an ending that properly conveyed what they wanted using indoctrination. So, if this comment is true and a developer really did say this, then it is possible that the Vent Kid could have some relation to indoctrination. However, it would not have an effect on the final product of the game. All in all, no one really knows for sure what the Vent Kid is supposed to be, leaving it open to interpretation. The general consensus on the internet, however, is that the Vent Kid is some form of post-traumatic stress disorder, which again makes sense for the Catalyst to take on the form of said PTSD, because it's something familiar to Shepard and something that he has been battling for quite some time. Alrighty guys, we have made it past my initial points of argumentation, and now I just have a few extra bits that I have that don't really correspond to a particular category, so I'm just gonna kind of shoot them off the top of my head here based off of my notes. Okay, so the first bit of extra argumentation that I have is the Prothean VI. Anyone who's familiar with indoctrination theory probably could have seen this coming. There's a whole section of the Indoctrination Theory wiki devoted to the Prothean VI in an attempt to sort of crudely discredit it, however it fails. So here is what the wiki page says about the Prothean VI. And as you can see, it's kind of a non-answer, if that makes sense. But right off the bat, you can see they've already answered the question, and it already disproves indoctrination theory. Now, there are two occasions in Mass Effect 3 where Kai Leng is present with the Prothean VI at the same time as Shepard, and on both of those occasions, the Prothean VI shuts itself down. And once Kai Leng and all the other indoctrinated forces are dealt with, the Prothean VI has no problem talking to Shepard or Shepard's squad mates. And the wiki page is even acknowledging this, and still just says anything is possible. Like, that's ridiculous. With regard to the Prothean VI, the theory has absolutely no credibility, especially when I compare it to what the indoctrination theory actually claims to be. So you can see here that the indoctrination theory is claiming to take place over the span of the Mass Effect series, and not just one game, saying that Shepard is being slowly and unknowingly indoctrinated by the Reapers. And here, again, if we look back at the explanation for the VI, it states the complete opposite, saying that he must have been indoctrinated at the very end, or they decide to throw it all completely out the window and say, oh, he just wasn't indoctrinated enough. However, they never ever talk about how much indoctrination is required. And that's because we don't know. Nobody can know. Which means it's a very poor argument when you're trying to uphold your theory, because you're using information that doesn't have an answer. So the Prothean VI actually does a pretty good job at combating the indoctrination theory. Because if Shepard was indoctrinated at any point in time or under the influence of indoctrination, the Prothean VI's security system would shut it down and Shepard would not be able to speak to it. However, this is not the case, and Shepard is easily able to communicate with the Prothean VI and get the information that he needs to help stop the Reapers. The final section of the indoctrination theory Wikipedia page that I wanted to talk about is this one, which involves two aspects that I have already argued against in this video. That being the VI, and that also being the time frame in which indoctrination needs to take place. Again, the question being asked here is very hard for the theory to combat, and again, the theory kind of fails to do so because it falls apart on itself. So it's saying if the Prothean VI on Thessia did not detect Shepard to be indoctrinated, might I also add that the VI also did not detect him to be indoctrinated while Shepard was attacking the Illusive Man's base, then that means he would have had to be indoctrinated incredibly fast at the very end of the game. And the theory's response to this is that indoctrination must have began very early on, but did not surface until the end of the game. But now it's just falling into the same problem that it had with its last answer, and that being that it still doesn't really answer the question. We want to know why the Prothean VI did not detect if Shepard was indoctrinated. We know that the VI can successfully detect indoctrination because it shuts itself down when Kai Leng approaches. So, why does it not detect Shepard's indoctrination? Well, the easy answer is Shepard is not indoctrinated. And there you go, the theory would be finished right there. However, rather than accepting what the game has told us, the indoctrination theory continues to push its narrative, stating that Shepard wasn't indoctrinated enough. But again, that is not a good argument, because nobody can answer when enough indoctrination is enough. And from my experience, you can't be a little bit indoctrinated. You either are indoctrinated or you're not. That is what the game has shown us. And if the theory claims that Shepard has been under Reaper indoctrinative influence since the beginning of the Mass Effect series, that means that he likely would have been indoctrinated by the time he met the Prothean VI, or at least been tainted by the Reapers to some extent. However, that is not the case. The VI does not shut down when Shepard approaches it, and so my argument stands, Shepard is not indoctrinated and indoctrination theory is bogus. So at this point, we're starting to realize that indoctrination theory is starting to suffer from some continuity issues. When does the indoctrination start? Nobody has a concrete answer. And when people pose questions that oppose the theory, the answers often contradict prior pieces of information that the theory used to defend itself. Why is indoctrination happening both at a fast and slow rate? It doesn't make any sense. How has Shepard managed to be under the Reaper influence for the entire Mass Effect series, but still not be detected by the Prothean VI, and somehow still be indoctrinated or going through the final form of indoctrination by the end of Mass Effect 3? None of that adds up. It doesn't go together. Because if the indoctrination was strong enough to fully overtake Shepard by the end of Mass Effect 3, the Prothean VI most certainly would have detected it. Okay, and I have one really quick thing I wanted to ask about the choices when involving the indoctrination theory and the final scenes of Mass Effect 3. So I know I have already covered the catalyst conversation and the decision chamber and everything, so I'm not going to repeat anything that I already said. However, this has more to do with the fact that the indoctrination theory is going on in Shepard's head. This is more of an argument against that fact entirely. And it has to do again with the three choices that you have. So we already know, according to the indoctrination theory, the only way for Shepard to live is to choose the destruction ending. But then that creates some issues with all the other endings, especially when the extended cut ending also gets added in. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, the extended cut ending that got added in was a little bit of content that allows Shepard to actually decline all choices given by the catalyst and basically just finishes your cycle. You lose the game, but your actions allow the next cycle to defeat the Reapers. So, with that in mind, why would the developers make a choice-based game that has 4 different outcomes, where only one of them is apparently the real outcome? Why would you do that? Because if indoctrination theory is true, that means synthesis, control, and also telling the Star Child that you don't want to do any of the decisions, all 3 of those end with the Reapers somehow beating Shepard's cycle. And that just all doesn't add up for me. I don't like the idea that 3 out of the 4 endings, that's more than half of the endings that the developers offered us, are apparently the incorrect ending, according to the indoctrination theory. That makes our choices even less impactful than what they originally were with the original outcome of the game. It makes a lot more sense to me that each ending does what it's supposed to do. Control controls the Reapers, synthesis synthesizes organics and synthetics, and destroy destroys the Reapers. And the very last option that was added in as fan service allows you to say no to all the decisions and lose your cycle, because that wasn't an option before, and now it is. And that would mean that after the extended cut DLC, we now have every possible outcome that Shepard could have made. Yet the indoctrination theory wants to throw all of BioWare's work out the window and state, oh no, 3 of them are all the same ending where the Reapers win, and only 1 is the ending where Shepard wins. I don't like that, and I don't believe that that is what the developers intended. Okay, and I guess now is a good time to address the whole inside Shepard's head thing anyway. Because in my opinion, there are far too many things that just don't make sense for this to be solely happening inside Shepard's head. With the biggest thing that doesn't add up for me being the little cutscenes that play out during the final mission on Earth after significant events have been achieved. Like, things like this. Not to mention that after one of your choices has been made and the Normandy is forced to leave the scene without Shepard, a cutscene plays out showing your crew members explaining to Joker that they have to leave. Which doesn't make sense if this is happening in Shepard's head, because apparently the decision hasn't really been made yet. Same can be said about every other cutscene we see at the end of the game after making the decision. The slideshow with Admiral Hackett narrating, and the memorial with your crew mourning the loss of Shepard, or at least the disappearance of Shepard, doesn't make any sense if the ending truly hasn't taken place. Are we to believe that these cutscenes are added in simply as an allusion to Shepard's fake victory inside his head? Now, I already know what the theorists are going to say. They're going to explain that despite the ending taking place in Shepard's mind, that doesn't mean that the rest of the galaxy and the universe just stops working. They're going to try to explain that despite Shepard's indoctrination, all the other galactic resources that have been rounded up over the course of the game are still fighting against the Reapers, and that is the reason that the ending of the game can still take place the way it does. The thing is, that only works for the destruction ending. You see, with the destruction ending, you can argue that while Shepard was unconscious, somebody else made it to the beam and destroyed the Reapers. And that's why the destroy ending cutscenes still play out the way they do. But this argument does not hold up for synthesis or control. Because if the Crucible's sole purpose was supposed to be to destroy the Reapers, and synthesis and control were simply figments of Shepard's imagination while he was being indoctrinated, that means anyone else that made it to the beam would have had to destroy them. Yet, there are still slideshows and cutscenes given if control and synthesis are chosen, and each one explains how the Reaper threat was dealt with in its own way. So at this point, it's nearly impossible to suggest that this all happened in Shepard's head, because the ending with Indoctrination Theory would say that Shepard that chose synthesis or control was simply indoctrinated and lost. So how do the cutscenes depict a victory? The simple answer is, it is not happening in Shepard's head. That's all it takes. All you have to say is that it's legitimate, that the choices were real and the ending was real, and now the ending makes sense. Even pushing past the ending, it's even harder for the theory to try to explain the post-credit scenes. There's a scene that happens after the credits that depicts an old stargazer talking to a child about a man called the Shepard that once saved the galaxy from a great threat. Now just please try to explain how that can take place if Shepard was indoctrinated. Again, it's plausible that this ending could happen with the destroy ending with Indoctrination Theory, but with the synthesis and control endings, this is impossible. Any ending in which Shepard cannot break free of his indoctrination renders the post-credit scenes impossible to take place. Yet, they do take place. So, Indoctrination Theory must be false. And finally, I'm sure you all saw this coming from a mile away. This is the very last after-credit message that you receive upon completing Mass Effect 3. Mind you, this was added in with the extended cut. The message is stating that the Reaper threat has been put to rest because of Shepard's actions. If Shepard was indoctrinated, this message would be useless. Yet, here it is at the very end of the game. This is a message straight from the developers that basically puts Indoctrination Theory to an end. There is absolutely no way that the Reaper threat could be put to an end if Shepard was indoctrinated. It doesn't make sense. This message is explaining that the galaxy defeated the Reapers because of Shepard's actions, and that's final. There's nothing more to talk about with this message. The Indoctrination Theory cannot explain this message properly. Well guys, if you made it this far, I just want to say thank you very much for supporting my channel and watching my video. It took a lot of time and effort to construct this video in a way that I liked, and now I'm just going to quickly do a conclusion and wrap up my final thoughts on the Indoctrination Theory. Now, if you were to pick up a copy of Mass Effect 3 today, with all included DLCs, and not ever going on the internet to search related content to the Mass Effect series in hopes of saving yourself the spoilers, there is no way that you would assume Indoctrination Theory or indoctrination in general had anything to do with the ending of the game. Because when you take the game at face value, with all the DLC and all the context that comes with a finished game, your first thought is not to immediately begin to dig deeper on the ending and search for some unknown meaning. Because, at face value, this game is complete as of now. As of 2019, it's safe to say there's no extra content that's going to be coming out for this game, and the ending makes sense. The ending is straightforward, and the ending is understandable. There's no encompassing and overarching feelings of mystery at the end. There's nothing that leaves us wondering what's next. Now, there were plenty of people who supported, and probably still do support, the indoctrination theory that stated they believed that the next big bits of content that were going to be released after the extended cut DLC was all going to finally prove them right, and was finally going to show the world that indoctrination theory was real, and the fans who spent countless hours digging into this idea of indoctrination and picking apart and analyzing the ending very meticulously that was originally given to us were finally going to be rewarded, and they're going to be able to say, "I told you so." Yet, month after month and year after year, no such content was revealed. And every time a new piece of DLC was announced, the theorists would be revamped, they'd get excited, they'd say, "Hey look, this is the one," but it would be very short-lived, as after each piece of DLC was released, they would quickly realize the answer they had been so patiently waiting for to finally prove their theory was again never given. So they would just wait for the next piece of DLC, and the cycle would continue. And now here we are today, 7 years later, and that piece of DLC never came. Now, in case you didn't know, the indoctrination theory was originally conceived before the events of the extended cut DLC, and its premise was initially patched together to deal with the disappointment of the original Mass Effect ending before the extended cut. So essentially, it's a fan theory that gained so much traction that it became a phenomenon. And it gave gamers something to hold on to and something to believe in when the original ending had flopped so terribly. Nobody wanted to admit that the ending was that bad. And even if they did admit it, they did not want to believe it. So the indoctrination theory acted as a means for the fans to escape the reality of what had been given to them. And as time went on, more concepts were added to the theory, it became more complex, and it grew until it is what it is now. However, the initial theory was heavily damaged after the release of the extended cut DLC. There is no denying that. And as of today, and after watching this video, I hope you'll agree as well, that the indoctrination theory is essentially dead. In the beginning, it had a lot of traction, but as more DLCs and more content was added to explain the ending, the theory slowly but surely began to grasp at straws and began to experience many difficulties with its explanations that it used to use to combat the original ending. Now, don't get me wrong, there is still plenty of people that believe in the indoctrination theory, and they are certain that indoctrination theory was intended by the writers, and that the fans didn't really create this ending, but rather had found it through the hard work and research that they had done. And I'm sure it would be very difficult for these people to admit that all of their work was for nothing if they decided to just dump the indoctrination theory after the extended cut was released. However, for me, it's just not good enough. I have never really taken an interest in indoctrination theory, and I don't think I ever will. It just raises too many questions that are either unanswerable or have answers that contradict themselves. And when you take the game at face value and believe it all to be what it actually is, then the answers are given to you rather than you having to go digging, and they make sense and they don't contradict. It's a lot more compelling to suggest that the ending is real, but indoctrination was still somewhat present throughout the series. And that seems a lot more reasonable to me than what the indoctrination theory is actually trying to perpetuate. So I think that if hardcore theory fans were able to just release their grasp of the original theory and embraced a more relaxed approach that it suggested that indoctrination was present, but the ending still took place the way it was presented to us, then they would do a lot better job at actually gaining new supporters and being able to come up with a better explanation for this after the extended cut and all the DLCs have been released. Because speaking from experience, I played the Mass Effect series long after it was popular, and I never even considered indoctrination theory to be a real thing. I always just interpreted the games the way that they had been presented to me. And if people started to say that indoctrination is present throughout Mass Effect 3, but Shepard can't be indoctrinated, and the ending takes place the way that we are actually perceiving it, then that makes a lot more sense than what the indoctrination theory is trying to fight for now. Because that would incorporate both what the game has told us throughout the series, as well as something that may have been hinted at slightly, instead of just full out claiming that he is entirely indoctrinated. So I think people should consider that. So everyone, I want to greatly thank you for watching my video. I really do appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. I did my best. I added in as much detail as I could. I tried to be as straightforward as I could, and I hope that you all understand my point of view properly now. And at the end of the day, this theory has never truly been denied by the developers, but for the sake of time and it being 2019, I believe we should all just agree that the indoctrination theory was a fantastic creation, a fantastic fan theory, but it just isn't worth supporting anymore. It's the final outcome of many people working together to fix a narrative problem that many people were originally upset with, and that's all it ever will be. Now, it's fantastic to see how resourceful and how dedicated this fan base is, being able to thoroughly piece together an ending that had been broken upon release and be able to bring everyone together to have one common consensus while everyone else was upset with the ending. But it's time for the theory to accept that after years and years of contemplation and after many pieces of DLC have been released, the indoctrination theory is dead. It has lost, and at this point, we should all be remembering it as an amazing fan theory that ultimately achieved its initial goal. But it's time for it to rest. Thank you.